The December wind howled through downtown Los Angeles with an unusual ferocity, carrying the scent of approaching rain and the promise of the first real storm Southern California had seen in months. The normally bustling streets of the Arts District were quieter than usual, with most people seeking shelter indoors as temperatures dropped to levels that reminded everyone why even paradise could turn harsh during winter nights that seemed to stretch endlessly for those without warm places to call home. Ozzy Osbourne pulled his black wool coat tighter as he walked alone down South Spring Street, having deliberately slipped away from his security detail for one of his increasingly rare solo walks through the city. At 75, these moments of solitude had become precious to him, opportunities to observe the world without the buffer of handlers, bodyguards, and the careful choreography that typically surrounded his public appearances, creating artificial barriers between him and the real experiences of ordinary people navigating their daily struggles. He was returning from a late dinner meeting with his publisher, discussing final edits for his upcoming memoir, when the conversation had run longer than expected, and his driver had been dismissed for the evening. Rather than calling for another car or summoning his usual entourage, Ozzy had decided to walk the dozen blocks back to his downtown hotel, enjoying the unusual quiet of streets that were normally congested with traffic, tourists, and the relentless pace of urban life that rarely allowed for genuine human connection. If you're enjoying this story so far, I'd be incredibly grateful if you could show your support with a like. Your encouragement means the world to writers like me and helps stories like this reach more readers. The homeless encampments he passed were larger and more elaborate than he remembered from previous visits to Los Angeles. Rows of tents and makeshift shelters that spoke to a crisis that had grown significantly during the years of economic uncertainty, rising housing costs, and social services stretched far beyond their capacity to address the fundamental needs of the city's most vulnerable residents. As someone who had struggled with his own demons and understood intimately what it meant to feel lost, desperate, and abandoned by systems that were supposed to provide support, Ozzy felt a familiar pang of empathy for the people trying to survive on the streets of one of America's wealthiest and most image-conscious cities. The contrast was stark and troubling. Gleaming high-rise condominiums casting shadows over tent cities, expensive restaurants with lines of people waiting for tables, while others searched through garbage cans for discarded food. Luxury cars navigating around shopping carts filled with the desperate possessions of people who had lost everything except their determination to survive another day. It was near the corner of 4th and Spring, in the doorway of a closed boutique whose window displays featured clothing that cost more than most people earned in a month, that he heard the voice. So quiet, he almost missed it over the sound of the wind, distant traffic, and the urban symphony of sirens and construction noise that provided the constant soundtrack to city life. A young girl, probably no more than 16, but with eyes that looked decades older, was sitting in the narrow doorway, wrapped in a thin blanket that looked like it had been salvaged from somewhere and had seen better days, possibly better years. Her dark hair hung in tangles around a face that was gaunt with hunger and exhaustion, and her eyes held the kind of wary alertness that street kids develop to survive in situations where danger could emerge from any direction at any moment. Despite her obvious vulnerability and desperate circumstances, there was something about her posture, straight-backed even while sitting on cold concrete, that suggested a dignity and strength that harsh conditions hadn't been able to break. She wasn't displaying the aggressive desperation that sometimes characterized people who had been on the streets for extended periods, nor the defeated resignation that often followed extended exposure to society's indifference to human suffering. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying a politeness and respect that suggested she had been raised with good values despite whatever circumstances had led her to this doorway. "I'm hungry." Two simple words that carried the weight of desperation, vulnerability, and a courage that most adults would struggle to find in similar circumstances. There was no elaborate sob story, no manipulation or emotional blackmail, no attempt to explain her situation or justify her need with dramatic details about her past, just the honest admission of a fundamental human requirement that wasn't being met, delivered with a dignity that was somehow more powerful than any plea or demand could have been. Ozzy stopped immediately, something about the girl's directness and quiet dignity cutting through the usual defenses that people developed when confronted with homelessness on city streets. Most pedestrians had learned to avoid eye contact, to pretend not to hear requests for help, to focus on their phones or destinations rather than acknowledging the human beings whose presence challenged comfortable assumptions about success, failure, and social responsibility. Up close, he could see that she was even younger than he'd initially thought, probably 14 or 15 at most, with the kind of unhealthy thinness that spoke of meals skipped not by choice, but by necessity, of a growing body that wasn't receiving the nutrition required for healthy development. Her clothes were layered for warmth rather than fashion, and everything about her appearance suggested someone who had learned to make do with whatever resources she could find or receive from occasional acts of charity. "What's your name, love?" Ozzy asked gently, crouching down to her eye level rather than looming over her in a way that might feel intimidating or condescending to someone whose daily experience probably included a lot of adults treating her as invisible, disposable, or threatening. "Sophia," she replied, pronouncing it with a slight accent that suggested Latino heritage and family roots in a culture that valued respect for elders and formal courtesy, even in the most difficult circumstances. "Sophia Martinez. How long have you been out here, Sophia?" he asked, using her name deliberately to acknowledge her as an individual person rather than just another anonymous face in the growing crowd of people experiencing homelessness. "About 6 months now," she answered, pulling the blanket more tightly around her shoulders against the cold wind that seemed to be getting stronger as the evening progressed. "Since my mum died from cancer and I couldn't stay with my foster family anymore because they didn't have enough space for all the kids they were supposed to be taking care of." The matter-of-fact way she delivered this devastating information. No self-pity, no elaborate explanation designed to evoke sympathy, just a simple statement of circumstances that had led her to this doorway, reminded Ozzy painfully of his own children and how they might sound if they were ever faced with such impossible choices and system failures that left vulnerable young people to fend for themselves on dangerous streets. "Have you eaten today?" he asked, though her appearance already suggested the answer, and he felt foolish for asking such an obvious question when the evidence of her hunger was visible in her thin face and the way she held herself, as if conserving energy for essential functions. Sophia shook her head slowly. "I had some bread yesterday that someone gave me from a restaurant, and some water from a fountain in the park. There was supposed to be food at the shelter, but they ran out before I got there, and they said to come back tomorrow, but they can't promise anything." Her answer revealed the harsh realities of a support system that was overwhelmed and under-resourced, where even the most basic human needs couldn't be reliably met, and where vulnerable people were forced to navigate a maze of bureaucracy and limited services just to access the kind of assistance that should be automatically available in a wealthy society. What happened next would be captured on security cameras from multiple angles and would eventually be seen by millions of people around the world, analysed by social commentators and referenced in discussions about celebrity philanthropy and social responsibility. But in the moment, it felt completely natural and unremarkable to both participants. Just one human being responding to another's express need with the kind of immediate, comprehensive assistance that circumstances required. Ozzy pulled out his phone and, instead of calling for his driver or security team to extract him from an uncomfortable situation, began making a series of calls that would fundamentally change Sophia's life trajectory, while also challenging his own assumptions about the most effective ways to help people facing desperate circumstances. The first call went to the concierge at his hotel, explaining that he needed assistance arranging emergency accommodation for someone in crisis, not just a room for one night, but the kind of comprehensive support that would address immediate needs while also creating space for longer-term planning and stability. The second call went to Sharon, briefly explaining the situation he had encountered and asking her to immediately begin researching the best residential programs for homeless youth in the Los Angeles area, specifically programs that combined safe housing with educational support, mental health services, and job training opportunities. The third call went to his management team, not to handle publicity or damage control as they might have expected, but to begin the process of ensuring that Sophia would have access to comprehensive support services that addressed not just her immediate crisis, but her long-term potential for independence and success. But what captured the world's attention and would eventually shock millions of people wasn't the phone calls or the immediate financial assistance. It was what Ozzy did while waiting for help to arrive. Rather than simply providing money or calling professionals to handle the situation so he could continue with his evening, he sat down on the cold sidewalk next to Sophia and began talking with her about her life, her dreams, her plans for the future, and her memories of better times. "Tell me about your mum," he said gently, settling onto the concrete as if it were a comfortable chair rather than a dirty city sidewalk. "What was she like? What did she teach you?" For the next hour and a half, as they waited for social services and emergency housing advocates to arrive, Sophia shared her story with someone who listened with genuine attention and interest rather than the professional detachment or voyeuristic curiosity that she had encountered from adults who had previously tried to help her navigate various systems and bureaucracies. Her mother had been a hotel housekeeper who had worked multiple jobs to support them both after Sophia's father had died in a construction accident when she was 8 years old, leaving the family without savings or life insurance. Her mother had been determined to provide stability and opportunities for education despite their financial struggles, often working double shifts and taking on additional cleaning jobs to pay for school supplies, books, and the small luxuries that helped Sophia feel normal among her more affluent classmates. When her mother was diagnosed with an aggressive form of breast cancer that required extensive treatment, the medical bills had quickly consumed their modest savings and eventually forced them out of their apartment when rent payments became impossible to maintain alongside mounting healthcare costs. They had moved into a series of increasingly desperate temporary housing situations, staying with friends until they wore out their welcome, living in their car when weather permitted, occasionally finding space in overcrowded emergency shelters that were designed for much shorter stays. After her mother's death, which had come more quickly than doctors had predicted despite aggressive treatment that left the family financially devastated, Sophia had been placed with a foster family that was already overcrowded and under-resourced. The foster parents were well-meaning but overwhelmed by the number of children in their care, and when Sophia turned 14 and became increasingly difficult to place due to her age and the system's preference for placing younger children, she had made the difficult decision to leave rather than continue moving between temporary situations that felt more like warehouses for unwanted children than actual homes. "My mum always said education was the only thing no one could take away from you," Sophia told Ozzy, her voice growing stronger and more animated as she talked about the dreams and values that her mother had instilled in her despite their difficult circumstances. "She used to help me with my homework every night, even when she was exhausted from working 2 jobs. She said that if I could get good grades and go to college, I could have the kind of life where I wouldn't have to worry about money for basic things like food and rent." "What did you want to study?" Ozzy asked, genuinely curious about this remarkable young woman's aspirations and goals. "I want to be a nurse," Sophia replied without hesitation. "Like the people who took care of my mum when she was sick. They were so kind and professional, even when we couldn't always pay all the bills on time. They treated her with dignity and respect, and they helped me understand what was happening and how to take care of her at home. I want to do that for other families who are going through what we went through." What struck Ozzy most powerfully was Sophia's resilience and hope despite circumstances that would have broken many adults. She spoke about her mother with love and gratitude, rather than bitterness about their struggles, about her current situation as temporary rather than permanent, and about her future with determination and specific goals rather than vague wishes or resigned despair. Her intelligence was obvious in the way she articulated her thoughts and analyzed her situation. Her emotional maturity evident in her ability to process grief and loss while maintaining focus on future possibilities. Despite being failed by multiple systems that were supposed to protect and support her, she had retained her faith in the possibility of positive change and her commitment to working hard to achieve her goals. "You remind me of my daughter Kelly," Ozzy told her as they waited, not making the comparison lightly, but recognizing genuine similarities in their strength and determination. "Not because you look alike, but because you have that same inner toughness, that same refusal to let circumstances define who you are or limit what you can become." When the social services team finally arrived, led by Maria Gonzalez, a veteran advocate for homeless youth who had been working in the field for over 15 years, they were surprised to find Ozzy still sitting on the sidewalk with Sophia. Both of them engaged in animated conversation about books they had read, music they enjoyed, and Sophia's specific plans for continuing her education once she had stable housing and support. "Mr. Osbourne," Maria said, clearly impressed by the scene she was witnessing. "We've arranged emergency placement for Sophia at one of our best residential facilities that specializes in supporting homeless teenagers. They have comprehensive educational programs, individual and group counseling services, job training opportunities, and most importantly, case managers who work with each resident to develop individualized plans for achieving independence and long-term stability." That's wonderful," Ozzy replied, standing up and helping Sophia to her feet with the same courtesy he would have shown any respected friend or family member. "But I want to make sure this is more than just temporary crisis intervention. Sophia has specific goals and dreams, and I want to help her achieve them in whatever way I can." What followed was a detailed conversation between Ozzy, Maria, and Sophia about long-term planning that went far beyond immediate crisis intervention and temporary housing solutions. Ozzy committed to funding Sophia's education, not just through high school completion, but through college and potentially graduate school, if she chose to pursue advanced degrees in nursing or related fields. The financial commitment included not just tuition and fees, but living expenses, books, tutoring support, and the kind of comprehensive assistance that would allow her to focus on academics and personal development rather than survival and basic needs. But more importantly, he insisted that the assistance be structured as investment in her demonstrated potential, rather than charity for her unfortunate circumstances. Sophia would be expected to maintain good academic standing, participate in community service projects, and eventually help other young people who found themselves in similar situations. The support would include mentorship, life skills training, and the kind of comprehensive guidance that would help her develop the professional and personal skills necessary for long-term success and independence. "This isn't about feeling sorry for you," Ozzy explained to Sophia as they prepared to leave for the residential facility where she would begin the next phase of her life. "This is about recognizing your strength, intelligence, and potential, and making sure you have access to the resources and opportunities you need to develop them fully and achieve the goals your mother would have wanted for you." The media coverage of the encounter began almost immediately, as bystanders had recognized Ozzy despite his attempt to remain anonymous and had recorded portions of his interaction with Sophia on their phones. The footage showed him sitting on the sidewalk, talking earnestly with a young homeless girl, making phone calls on her behalf, and treating her with obvious respect and genuine interest in her story and aspirations. But rather than focusing primarily on the celebrity aspect of the story or treating it as a publicity stunt, most coverage emphasized the comprehensive nature of his response and the dignity with which he had treated Sophia throughout their conversation. Social media posts praised his willingness to sit on a dirty sidewalk and spend significant time actually listening to someone most people would have ignored or dismissed with a few dollars and a hurried, "Good luck." Within days, Sophia Strong was trending worldwide, but not as a hashtag celebrating celebrity charity or feel-good publicity. Instead, it became a platform for serious discussions about youth homelessness, the systematic failures of foster care systems, and the importance of providing comprehensive, long-term support rather than just temporary emergency assistance to vulnerable young people who aged out of protective services without adequate preparation or ongoing support. The residential facility where Sophia was placed received hundreds of donations inspired by her story, while similar organizations across the country reported increased volunteer applications, funding commitments, and most importantly, policymakers beginning to pay attention to the scope and complexity of issues facing homeless youth. Several states began reviewing their policies regarding aging out of foster care and support services for young people transitioning to independence. Congressional representatives cited Sophia's story in hearings about federal funding for youth services, while social work schools used her case as an example of the kind of comprehensive, individualized support that produced successful outcomes rather than just temporary relief from immediate crises. 6 months later, Sophia was thriving in her new environment in ways that surprised even the experienced counselors and case managers who worked with homeless youth regularly. She had not only caught up academically with her peer group despite months of interrupted schooling, but was actually performing at advanced levels in several subjects, particularly sciences and mathematics, that would be essential for her nursing career goals. More impressively, She had become a leader among the other residents at the facility, serving as a mentor and advocate for younger children who were just entering the program and struggling to adjust to structured living after extended periods of survival on the streets. Her room became an informal study center, where other residents came for help with homework and advice about navigating educational and career planning services. The most important thing Mr. Osbourne did, Sophia explained in an interview for a documentary about youth homelessness that was being produced by a major streaming service, wasn't giving me money or finding me a place to stay, though obviously those things were essential. It was treating me like a whole person with dreams, intelligence, and potential, not just a problem to be solved or a charity case to be managed. She continued, "When someone sits down on a sidewalk with you and asks about your goals and your family and actually listens to your answers, they're telling you that you matter as a human being. That's something I hadn't experienced from adults in a very long time, and it changed how I thought about myself and what was possible for my future." Ozzy remained closely involved in Sophia's progress, not as a distant benefactor writing checks, but as something approaching a mentor and family friend who took genuine interest in her academic achievements, personal growth, and developing plans for her future career in healthcare. He attended her high school graduation ceremony, celebrated her acceptance into a competitive nursing program at UCLA, and continued to check in regularly on her academic progress and personal development. "What I learned from Sophia," Ozzy reflected in his memoir, which was published the following year and dedicated in part to her and other young people he had encountered who demonstrated extraordinary resilience in the face of systematic failures and societal indifference, "is that the most meaningful form of help isn't about fixing someone's problems for them or making their difficulties disappear with money. It's about providing them with the resources, support, and most importantly, the respect they need to achieve their own goals and become the person they want to be." 3 years after their first meeting on that cold December evening, Sophia was excelling in her nursing program while also working part-time at a free clinic that served homeless populations throughout Los Angeles. Her academic performance had earned her several scholarships and recognition from professors who praised not only her clinical skills, but her exceptional ability to connect with patients who had experienced trauma, addiction, and social marginalization. She had also established a non-profit organization focused on providing educational support, mentorship, and advocacy services for foster children aging out of the system, young people facing the same transition challenges that had led to her own period of homelessness. Her organization worked directly with social services agencies to identify at-risk youth and connect them with comprehensive support before they ended up on the streets. "Sophia taught me that resilience isn't just about surviving difficult situations," Ozzy said in a keynote speech at a national conference on youth homelessness, an event that raised over $2 million for programs serving vulnerable young people. "It's about maintaining hope, working toward your dreams, and believing in your own worth, even when everything around you seems designed to convince you that you don't matter and you'll never amount to anything." The encounter had also fundamentally influenced Ozzy's broader approach to philanthropy and social engagement, moving him away from traditional charitable giving toward more direct, relationship-based support that combined financial resources with personal mentorship and long-term commitment to individual success stories. Rather than simply writing checks to established charities and attending fundraising galas, he began seeking out direct relationships with individuals and communities that could benefit from both financial support and personal involvement. His foundation expanded its focus from general charitable giving to comprehensive support for specific individuals and families, with emphasis on education, healthcare, and the kind of wraparound services that addressed multiple factors contributing to poverty and social marginalization. Meeting Sophia reminded me that the most effective charity happens when you actually get to know the people you're trying to help, he explained in an extensive interview for Rolling Stone magazine that focused on his evolving approach to social responsibility. When you understand their specific needs, dreams, and capabilities, you can provide support that actually makes a lasting difference rather than just temporary relief from immediate problems. 5 years later, Sophia graduated from nursing school with highest honors and was immediately accepted into a competitive pediatric nursing program at Children's Hospital Los Angeles, one of the most prestigious medical facilities on the West Coast. Her graduation ceremony was attended not only by Ozzy and Sharon, who had truly become surrogate grandparents, but also by dozens of other young people who had been inspired by her story to pursue their own educational goals despite facing significant obstacles and systematic disadvantages. The night I met Mr. Osbourne, I was hungry and scared and didn't know how I was going to survive the next day, much less achieve any of the dreams my mother had taught me to believe in, Sophia said in her graduation speech, which was broadcast live on social media and viewed by millions of people around the world. But what happened that night wasn't just that someone helped me with food and shelter, though obviously those immediate needs were crucial. Someone saw my potential when I had almost forgotten it myself, and they invested in my ability to become the person I wanted to be, rather than just managing my problems as a charity case. The story had become part of popular culture and academic curriculum, referenced in social work programs, discussed in policy seminars, and cited in research about effective interventions for youth homelessness. But it had also inspired practical changes in how cities, states, and non-profit organizations approached services for vulnerable populations. Several major cities implemented programs specifically designed around the comprehensive, relationship-based model that Ozzy and Sophia had developed, with trained mentors working long-term with individual youth to provide not just crisis intervention, but sustained support for achieving specific educational and career goals. The outcomes from these programs consistently showed higher rates of stable housing, educational completion, and successful transition to independence compared to traditional approaches focused on temporary emergency assistance. But for both Ozzy and Sophia, the most meaningful aspect of their relationship was its evolution from crisis intervention to genuine family connection that had enriched both their lives in ways neither had anticipated. Sophia had become an integral part of the extended Osbourne family, while Ozzy had gained new perspective on the difference between temporary charity and lasting investment in human potential. "Two words changed both our lives forever," Ozzy reflected during a television interview on the 5th anniversary of their meeting. Sophia said, "I'm hungry," and in that moment of courage and honesty, she taught me that the most important response to human need isn't just to provide immediate relief, though that's obviously necessary. It's to see the whole person, understand their dreams and capabilities, and commit to supporting their journey toward the life they envision for themselves. The encounter had demonstrated that the most shocking acts of compassion often weren't dramatic gestures or huge financial commitments designed to generate publicity, but simple recognition of human dignity combined with sustained relationship-based support for individual growth and self-determination. It proved that authentic charity required personal investment, mutual respect, and long-term commitment rather than just momentary generosity or institutional giving. Most importantly, it showed that when vulnerable people were treated with genuine respect and provided with comprehensive support that addressed both immediate needs and long-term potential, they could achieve remarkable things that benefited not just themselves, but entire communities of people facing similar challenges and systematic barriers to success and stability. Thank you for experiencing this deeply moving story of how two simple words led to a life-changing encounter and lasting transformation that shocked the world with its depth and authenticity. If this tale of recognizing potential in unexpected places and the transformative power of sustained compassion touched your heart, I'd be incredibly grateful if you could show your support with a like. Your engagement helps stories like this reach more readers and reminds us all that the most profound acts of kindness often begin with simply seeing the full humanity and potential in everyone we encounter.